Part 12, The Art of Friendship and Human Relationships. Socrates understood that human beings are fundamentally social creatures whose character development and flourishing depend heavily on the quality of their relationships with others. His analysis of friendship reveals sophisticated insights about what kinds of relationships promote virtue and wisdom versus those that enable vice and ignorance. Understanding Socratic principles of friendship provides practical guidance for forming and maintaining relationships that support mutual growth toward excellence while avoiding the common patterns that create dependency, conflict, and moral deterioration. The foundation of Socratic friendship lies in shared commitment to truth and virtue rather than mere emotional attraction or mutual benefit. Socrates distinguished between relationships based on pleasure, utility, and excellence, arguing that only friendships grounded in virtue provide lasting satisfaction and genuine mutual support. Friendships based primarily on pleasure depend on continued enjoyment that may fade as circumstances change or people mature. Relationships focused mainly on utility treat other people as means to personal ends rather than recognizing their intrinsic worth and potential for growth. True friendship, according to Socratic analysis, emerges between people who recognize and encourage each other's highest capacities. Such friends challenge each other to examine their beliefs, question their assumptions, and strive for greater wisdom and virtue. They provide honest feedback about each other's character flaws and moral blind spots while offering support and encouragement for continued growth. Their relationship creates a collaborative environment for philosophical inquiry and personal development that neither person could achieve alone. This kind of friendship requires emotional maturity and intellectual courage because it involves vulnerability to criticism and willingness to acknowledge error. Someone committed to Socratic friendship must be prepared to have their most cherished beliefs questioned by people they respect and trust. They must develop the capacity to receive constructive criticism without becoming defensive and to offer challenging observations without causing unnecessary offense. The friendship becomes a laboratory for moral and intellectual development where both parties can experiment with new ideas and approaches while receiving honest evaluation of their progress. Socrates demonstrated this approach to friendship throughout his relationships with students and colleagues who engaged in philosophical dialogue with him. He combined genuine affection and loyalty with relentless questioning of their beliefs and assumptions. His care for their development motivated his willingness to risk their displeasure by exposing their ignorance and challenging their comfortable certainties. He understood that true friendship sometimes requires causing short-term discomfort to promote long-term growth and understanding. The Socratic model also emphasizes equality and reciprocity in friendship despite differences in knowledge, experience, or social status. While Socrates clearly possessed superior philosophical wisdom compared to many of his associates, he approached conversations as collaborative inquiries where everyone could contribute insights and everyone could learn something new. He recognized that wisdom can emerge from unexpected sources and that even apparent experts have limitations and blind spots that others might help them recognize. This humble approach prevented his friendships from becoming hierarchical relationships where one person always teaches and others always learn. Socratic friendship also involves shared commitment to moral excellence that transcends personal preferences or individual interests. True friends want what is genuinely good for each other rather than simply supporting whatever their friends happen to want. This means sometimes discouraging destructive desires or harmful plans while encouraging choices that promote character development and authentic fulfillment. Such friendship requires wisdom to distinguish between what people want and what they truly need for their flourishing. This principle can create tension when friends have different opinions about important life decisions or when caring for someone requires opposing their stated preferences. Socratic friendship suggests that genuine care sometimes requires intervention rather than uncritical support. But it also demands careful judgment about when such intervention is appropriate and how it can be offered constructively. The goal is always to promote the friend's autonomous development rather than to impose one's own vision of what their life should become. The Socratic approach to friendship extends beyond personal relationships to influence how we think about teaching, parenting, and leadership roles that involve responsibility for others' development. Teachers who embrace Socratic principles focus on helping students develop their own capacity for reasoning rather than simply transmitting information or enforcing compliance. Parents committed to this model encourage their children's independence and critical thinking while providing guidance about values and decision. Leaders in various contexts can apply Socratic friendship principles by creating environments where people feel safe to question, experiment, and grow rather than merely following instructions or meeting expectations. Socrates also understood that friendship requires practical wisdom about human psychology and social dynamics. People have different learning styles, emotional needs, and defensive patterns that affect how they respond to questioning and feedback. Effective friendship adapts its approach to the particular characteristics and circumstances of each relationship, while maintaining commitment to truth and mutual growth. This requires patience, empathy, and skill in communication that goes beyond intellectual understanding of philosophical principles. The social dimension of Socratic friendship reveals why isolation and excessive self-reliance can hinder moral and intellectual development. We all have blind spots and limitations that prevent us from seeing ourselves clearly or recognizing our own errors and prejudices. Friends who know us well and care about our growth can provide external perspectives that help us identify patterns we cannot see from inside our own experience. They can challenge assumptions we take for granted and encourage experiments with new approaches that we might never consider on our own. This collaborative aspect of moral development helps explain why Socrates conducted philosophy through dialogue rather than solitary reflection. Truth emerges more readily through conversation between people committed to honest inquiry than through individual meditation. However careful and systematic, different people bring different experiences, insights, and questions that can illuminate aspects of problems that no single perspective could reveal. The process of articulating ideas to others and responding to their questions forces greater precision and clarity than private thinking typically achieves. Contemporary applications of Socratic friendship principles can be found in various forms of peer learning, mentoring relationships, and support groups that emphasize mutual growth rather than mere emotional comfort. Professional development partnerships, study groups, and mastermind associations often work best when they combine personal support with intellectual challenge in ways that reflect Socratic insights about friendship. Therapeutic relationships and coaching partnerships can benefit from understanding how to balance acceptance with constructive confrontation of limiting beliefs and self-destructive patterns. Understanding Socratic friendship also provides guidance for evaluating and improving existing relationships. It suggests examining whether your friendships encourage your growth toward wisdom and virtue or enable patterns of behavior that limit your development. It raises questions about whether you are contributing to your friends' flourishing or merely enjoying their company without helping them become their best selves. It challenges the common assumption that good friendship means agreeing with and supporting whatever friends want rather than caring enough to offer honest perspectives about their choices and character. The Socratic model ultimately views friendship as one of the highest forms of human relationship because it combines love with wisdom in service of mutual excellence. Such friendships create communities of inquiry and support that make individual moral development both more achievable and more meaningful. They demonstrate how personal relationships can serve larger purposes of promoting truth and virtue while providing the intimate connection and mutual care that make life fulfilling. They offer hope that human beings can transcend the selfishness and superficiality that characterize many relationships to create bonds based on shared commitment to the highest human possibilities. Part 13. Pleasure, Pain, and the Good Life. Socrates developed a sophisticated analysis of the role that pleasure and pain should play in human life, rejecting both the pursuit of maximum pleasure and the avoidance of all physical enjoyment as adequate guides to flourishing. His approach to these fundamental human experiences reveals important insights about the relationship between immediate satisfaction and long-term happiness, the difference between higher and lower pleasures, and the proper place of physical and emotional experiences within a life devoted to virtue and wisdom. Understanding Socratic principles about pleasure and pain provides practical guidance for making decisions about everything from career choices to lifestyle habits to moral dilemmas where different values seem to conflict. The conventional approach to pleasure treats it as an obvious good that rational people will naturally seek to maximize while minimizing pain and discomfort. This hedonistic framework suggests that the best life involves accumulating as many pleasant experiences as possible, while avoiding whatever causes suffering or difficulty. From this perspective, moral rules and social obligations are valuable only insofar as they contribute to overall pleasure, and should be abandoned when they interfere with personal happiness. Success means achieving a lifestyle that provides consistent comfort, entertainment, and gratification with minimal effort or sacrifice. Socrates challenged this framework by examining what pleasure actually involves and whether pursuing it leads to the satisfaction people expect. He observed that many pleasures are temporary and followed by pain, creating cycles of craving and dissatisfaction rather than stable happiness. Someone who organizes their life around physical pleasures often finds that their capacity for enjoyment diminishes over time, requiring ever more intense stimulation to achieve the same level of satisfaction. The pursuit of pleasure can become compulsive and self-defeating, creating dependency on external sources of gratification that may not always be available. More fundamentally, Socrates argued that treating pleasure as the highest good reflects confusion about human nature and what actually contributes to flourishing. While humans are certainly capable of physical enjoyment, our distinctive capacity for reason, moral choice, and meaningful relationships suggest that our deepest satisfaction comes from exercising these higher functions rather than merely gratifying bodily desires. Someone who focuses primarily on pleasure may neglect the development of wisdom, virtue, and authentic relationships that provide more lasting and significant forms of happiness. But Socrates did not advocate for asceticism or rejection of all physical pleasure, as some philosophical traditions have done. He recognized that humans have bodily needs that require satisfaction and that appropriate enjoyment of physical pleasures can contribute to overall well-being when properly balanced with higher pursuits. The key is to treat pleasures as means to support virtuous activity rather than as ends in themselves, and to ensure that the pursuit of enjoyment does not interfere with the development of character and wisdom. This balanced approach requires practical wisdom to distinguish between pleasures that enhance human flourishing and those that diminish it. Pleasures that support health, strengthen relationships, and provide rest and restoration for continued virtuous activity deserve a place in the good life. But pleasures that create dependency, interfere with rational judgment, or distract from important responsibilities may be harmful despite their immediate appeal. The criterion is not whether something feels good, but whether it contributes to the kind of life that expresses human excellence and provides lasting satisfaction. Socrates' analysis of pain follows similar principles, treating it neither as an absolute evil to be avoided at all costs, nor as inherently valuable for character development. Some pain reflects genuine threats to well-being that deserve serious attention and appropriate response. Physical injury, illness, and emotional distress often signal problems that require investigation and remedy rather than simple endurance or avoidance. But other forms of discomfort may be natural consequences of pursuing virtue and wisdom that should be accepted rather than eliminated. The discomfort involved in examining one's beliefs, acknowledging error, and changing established habits represents productive pain that promotes growth and development. Someone committed to virtue will naturally experience tension when their desires conflict with their principles, frustration when facing difficult moral choices, and sadness when confronting the gap between their ideals and their achievements. This psychological discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong, but evidence that the person is taking moral development seriously and making progress toward greater wisdom and integrity. Similarly, the social difficulties that sometimes accompany commitment to truth and justice should be accepted as necessary costs of living authentically rather than reasons to abandon virtue. Someone who speaks honestly about important issues may face criticism or rejection from people who prefer comfortable illusions. A person who acts according to principle rather than expediency may experience career setbacks or social isolation. But Socrates argued that these external hardships are preferable to the internal corruption that results from compromising one's integrity for social acceptance or material advantage. This framework helps explain Socrates' famous claim that virtue is sufficient for happiness and that external goods like wealth, reputation, and physical comfort are indifferent to genuine well-being. He did not mean that these external conditions make no difference to human experience, but rather that someone who possesses virtue can maintain their essential happiness regardless of external circumstances. Their satisfaction comes primarily from the internal goods of wisdom, justice, courage, and authentic relationships that cannot be taken away by external forces. While external hardships may cause genuine suffering, they do not undermine the fundamental sources of meaning and satisfaction that make life worthwhile. The practical implications of Socratic principles about pleasure and pain extend throughout everyday decision-making about lifestyle, career, relationships, and moral choices. When considering whether to pursue particular opportunities or experiences, the primary question becomes not whether they will be pleasant or painful, but whether they will contribute to character development and authentic flourishing. Someone applying these principles might choose challenging work that promotes growth over comfortable positions that provide security but little opportunity for excellence. They might accept social criticism for maintaining unpopular principles rather than compromising their values for easier relationships. This approach also influences how we respond to unavoidable sufferings and setbacks that are part of every human life. Instead of treating pain as meaningless evil to be eliminated by any means necessary, Socratic wisdom suggests examining what difficult experiences might teach us about ourselves, our priorities, and our capacity for resilience. Illness, loss, failure, and disappointment can become opportunities for developing patience, courage, compassion, and perspective rather than simply obstacles to happiness. The goal is not to seek out suffering, but to respond wisely when it occurs unavoidably. Modern psychological research has provided substantial support for many Socratic insights about the relationship between pleasure-seeking and genuine well-being. Studies consistently show that people who organize their lives around hedonistic pleasure report lower levels of life satisfaction over time compared to those who pursue meaning, relationships, and personal growth. Research on addiction and compulsive behavior demonstrates how the pursuit of immediate gratification can create patterns that undermine long-term happiness. Investigation of resilience reveals that people who can find meaning in adversity often experience better mental health than those who focus primarily on avoiding discomfort. Understanding Socratic principles about pleasure and pain also provides resources for addressing contemporary debates about lifestyle choices, consumer culture, and the role of government in promoting citizen well-being. It suggests that policies focused primarily on increasing material comfort and entertainment options may not actually enhance human flourishing if they neglect character development and meaningful social participation. It raises questions about whether cultures that emphasize consumption and immediate gratification are creating conditions conducive to genuine happiness or merely sophisticated forms of dissatisfaction. The ultimate Socratic insight about pleasure and pain may be that both are secondary to the fundamental human need for meaning, virtue, and authentic relationships. While pleasant experiences and comfortable conditions can enhance life when properly balanced with higher pursuits, they cannot substitute for the satisfaction that comes from developing one's potential and contributing to human flourishing. Similarly, while pain and difficulty are genuinely challenging and should not be minimized, they need not undermine the essential sources of meaning and purpose that make life worth living. The key is maintaining proper priorities so that both pleasure and pain serve the larger goal of human excellence rather than becoming ends in themselves that distract from what matters most. Part 14. The Form of Good and Ultimate Reality. Socrates introduced one of the most profound and influential concepts in Western philosophy through his teaching about the form of good as the ultimate source of truth, beauty, and moral value in the universe. This theory represents his most ambitious attempt to explain the relationship between human knowledge and objective reality, between individual moral insights and universal principles of justice, and between the world of everyday experience and the eternal truths that make rational understanding possible. Understanding the Socratic conception of the good provides the metaphysical foundation for his entire philosophical system while addressing fundamental questions about the nature of existence and our place within it. The theory of forms emerged from Socrates' investigation of what makes true knowledge possible, and how humans can distinguish between genuine understanding and mere opinion. When we recognize that two different objects are both just or both beautiful or both courageous, we seem to be comparing them to some standard of justice, beauty, or courage that exists independently of particular examples. This universal standard cannot be identical with any specific instance because particular things only approximate perfection, while the standard itself must be perfectly and eternally what it is. The form of justice is what makes it possible to evaluate whether particular actions are just as the form of beauty enables us to recognize beautiful objects despite their differences from each other. But Socrates argued that all other forms depend on the form of good for their reality and intelligibility. We can understand what makes something truly just, courageous, or beautiful only by understanding how these qualities contribute to overall goodness and human flourishing. Justice is valuable because it promotes the good of individuals and communities. Courage matters because it enables people to pursue worthy goals despite obstacles. And beauty attracts us because it reflects the harmony and order that characterize genuine excellence. The good is the ultimate source of value that gives meaning and purpose to all other forms and makes rational choice between different options possible. This conception of the good as the ultimate reality helps explain why Socrates believed that knowledge and virtue are fundamentally connected. Someone who truly understands the good will naturally be drawn to pursue it in their actions and choices because the good represents what is most real and valuable in existence. Moral knowledge is not arbitrary human convention, but insight into the objective structure of reality that determines what kinds of actions and character traits actually contribute to flourishing. Evil and vice represent ignorance or distortion of this fundamental truth rather than equally valid alternative approaches to life. The famous analogy of the cave illustrates how the form of good relates to human knowledge and the educational process that leads to wisdom. Most people live like prisoners chained in a dark cave, mistaking shadows on the wall for reality because they have never seen the objects that cast those shadows or the fire that illuminates them. Education involves the painful process of turning around to face the light, gradually adjusting to see objects themselves rather than their reflections, and eventually emerging from the cave to see the sun that makes all vision possible. The sun in this analogy represents the form of good as the source of all truth and knowledge, while the journey from shadow to sunlight represents the philosophical development that leads to genuine understanding. This metaphor reveals why Socratic education is so challenging and why many people resist philosophical inquiry. Moving from comfortable illusions to difficult truths requires courage and persistence because the initial experience of questioning familiar beliefs creates confusion and disorientation. Someone who has spent years accepting conventional opinions about success, happiness, and virtue may find it painful to discover that their assumptions are inadequate or false. The process of developing genuine wisdom involves temporary loss of certainty and confidence that many people find too uncomfortable to endure. But Socrates argued that this temporary discomfort is necessary to achieve the liberation and satisfaction that come with authentic understanding. Someone who has glimpsed the form of good experiences a transformation in perspective that makes previous concerns seem relatively unimportant, while opening up new possibilities for meaning and purpose. They understand their place within the larger rational order of existence, and can make decisions based on objective truth rather than subjective preference or social pressure. Their actions become expressions of wisdom rather than mere responses to immediate circumstances or unconscious habits. The theory of the good also provides the foundation for Socratic political philosophy, and his vision of justice in the ideal state. A society organized according to rational principles would reflect the same harmonious order that exists among the forms, with each person contributing their distinctive talents in ways that serve the common good. Laws and institutions would embody justice, courage, and wisdom rather than merely reflecting the interests of those powerful enough to impose their will on others. Education would focus on helping citizens understand their place within this rational order and develop the character necessary to fulfill their roles excellently. This ideal may seem impossibly utopian, but Socrates argued that it provides a necessary standard for evaluating existing societies and working toward improvement. Even if no human community can perfectly embody the form of good, understanding what perfect justice would look like enables us to identify the strengths and weaknesses of actual political systems. We can work to reform laws and institutions in directions that better approximate the ideal, while remaining realistic about the limitations imposed by human nature and circumstances. The form of good serves as a guide for practical reform rather than merely abstract speculation. The metaphysical implications of the theory extend to questions about the nature of existence and humanity's relationship to ultimate reality. If the forms represent eternal and perfect truths that exist independently of the physical world, this suggests that rational understanding connects us to something transcendent and permanent rather than merely temporary arrangements of matter and energy. Human reason participates in the same logical structure that governs the universe, making genuine knowledge possible and providing objective foundations for moral and aesthetic judgments. This view offers an alternative to both materialistic reductionism and religious fundamentalism by grounding meaning and value in rational principles accessible through philosophical inquiry. Critics of the theory have raised important questions about how eternal forms relate to the changing world of everyday experience, and whether postulating perfect abstractions actually explains anything about particular objects and events. If the form of justice is perfectly just, while human actions only approximate justice imperfectly, how does knowledge of the form help us make specific moral decisions in complex situations? How can changeless eternal truths explain or guide choices in a world characterized by constant flux and unique historical circumstances? These challenges have motivated centuries of philosophical development that attempts to preserve Socratic insights while addressing their apparent limitations. Modern applications of Socratic thinking about ultimate reality can be found in various fields that assume the existence of objective truths discoverable through rational inquiry. Scientific research proceeds on the assumption that mathematical and logical principles provide reliable tools for understanding natural phenomena because they reflect the rational structure of reality itself. Legal systems attempt to embody principles of justice that transcend particular cultural preferences or historical circumstances. Artistic and literary criticism assumes that some works genuinely possess greater beauty or significance than others based on objective rather than merely subjective criteria. Understanding the Socratic conception of the form of good also provides resources for addressing contemporary debates about moral relativism, the relationship between science and values, and the possibility of objective knowledge in a pluralistic world. It suggests that disagreement about moral and aesthetic questions does not necessarily prove that no correct answers exist, but may simply reflect the difficulty of achieving genuine understanding about complex matters. The existence of cultural differences in values and practices does not eliminate the possibility that some approaches to human flourishing are objectively better than others based on their relationship to universal human needs and capacities. The ultimate significance of the theory of the good may lie in its vision of human potential and purpose within a rationally ordered cosmos. It suggests that our capacity for moral insight, aesthetic appreciation, and logical reasoning connects us to the deepest truths about existence rather than being merely useful survival mechanisms or cultural constructions. The pursuit of wisdom becomes not just personally fulfilling, but a participation in the ongoing self-revelation of ultimate reality through rational inquiry and virtuous action. This provides a foundation for meaning and purpose that transcends individual mortality and cultural limitations while remaining grounded in human reason rather than arbitrary faith or emotional preference. Part 15. The Socratic Revolution in Education. Socrates fundamentally transformed the understanding of education by shifting focus from the transmission of information to the development of critical thinking and moral character. His revolutionary approach demonstrated that genuine learning cannot be imposed from outside but must emerge through internal questioning and discovery guided by skilled teachers who understand how to awaken dormant capacities rather than simply fill empty minds with content. The Socratic educational philosophy continues to influence pedagogy, curriculum design, and institutional approaches to human development, while providing crucial insights about how people actually learn and what kinds of education promote authentic growth and wisdom. Traditional education in Socrates' time focused primarily on memorizing information, learning technical skills, and acquiring cultural knowledge that would enable students to function successfully within existing social structures. Teachers were expected to possess expert knowledge in their subjects and transfer that knowledge to students through lectures, demonstrations, and repetitive practice. Success was measured by students' ability to recall facts, perform prescribed procedures, and reproduce accepted answers to standard questions. This approach treated education as a banking process where teachers made deposits of knowledge into passive student accounts. Socrates challenged this model by demonstrating that people often think they understand concepts when they actually possess only superficial familiarity with terminology and conventional associations. His questioning of apparently educated individuals revealed that their supposed knowledge frequently consisted of unexamined assumptions, borrowed opinions, and confused generalizations rather than genuine understanding based on careful reasoning. Even people who could recite correct definitions or perform complex procedures might lack insight into the principles that made their knowledge valid, or the connections that related different pieces of information to each other. The famous demonstration with the slave boy in geometry illustrates how Socratic education works by helping people discover knowledge that already exists within them rather than simply providing external information. Through careful questioning, Socrates guides an untrained slave to work out complex mathematical relationships without being given any direct instruction about geometric principles. The boy's ability to solve problems he has never encountered before suggests that learning involves recovering understanding that the soul possesses rather than acquiring completely foreign material. This implies that everyone has the potential to develop wisdom if properly encouraged and guided through appropriate questioning. But Socratic education extends far beyond techniques for teaching academic subjects to encompass the entire process of character development and moral growth. The most important learning involves understanding fundamental questions about how to live well, what goals are worth pursuing, and what kind of person one should strive to become. These questions cannot be answered by memorizing facts or following prescribed procedures, but require ongoing reflection, experimentation, and dialogue with others who are engaged in similar inquiry. Education becomes a lifelong process of self-discovery and character development rather than a temporary period of preparation for adult responsibilities. The role of the teacher in Socratic education is fundamentally different from that of the traditional instructor who possesses knowledge and transmits it to ignorant students. The Socratic teacher functions more like a midwife who assists in the birth of ideas that develop naturally within students rather than imposing external concepts that must be accepted on authority. This requires understanding not only the subject matter but also the psychological processes through which people learn and the emotional obstacles that prevent them from recognizing their own ignorance or accepting difficult truths. The teacher must be skilled in asking questions that promote genuine thinking rather than simply eliciting correct answers. This educational approach requires patience and humility from teachers who must resist the temptation to provide easy answers when students struggle with difficult questions. Socratic education often involves allowing students to make mistakes and discover their errors through their own experience rather than preventing all confusion through careful explanation. Teachers must be comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity because many important questions do not have simple answers that can be stated definitively. The goal is to develop students' capacity for independent thinking rather than their ability to reproduce teacher knowledge accurately. Students in Socratic education must also adopt different attitudes and expectations compared to those in traditional instructional settings. They cannot remain passive recipients of information, but must actively engage in questioning their own beliefs and examining the evidence for their opinions. They must develop tolerance for confusion and frustration because the process of genuine learning often involves temporary disorientation as familiar certainties are challenged. They must be willing to acknowledge ignorance and error rather than defending their initial positions to maintain self-esteem or social standing. The collaborative aspect of Socratic education emphasizes learning through dialogue and community inquiry rather than individual study or competitive achievement. Students learn as much from engaging with each other's questions and insights as they do from direct interaction with teachers. Different people bring different perspectives and experiences that can illuminate aspects of problems that no single viewpoint could reveal. The classroom becomes a community of inquiry where everyone contributes to collective understanding rather than a hierarchy where knowledge flows only from teacher to student. This approach has profound implications for assessment and evaluation because traditional testing methods cannot adequately measure the kinds of learning that Socratic education promotes. Multiple-choice questions and standardized exams may test students' ability to recognize correct information but cannot evaluate their capacity for independent reasoning or moral judgment. More appropriate assessment methods might include portfolios of reflective writing, oral examinations that require defending positions through dialogue, and projects that demonstrate ability to apply principles to novel situations. The emphasis shifts from measuring knowledge accumulation to evaluating growth in wisdom and character over time. Socratic educational principles also influence curriculum design by suggesting that subjects should be organized around fundamental questions rather than merely technical content or disciplinary boundaries. Instead of teaching history as a series of facts and dates, educators might focus on questions about what causes social change, how individuals can influence historical events, and what lessons past experiences provide for contemporary challenges. Science education might emphasize the process of inquiry and the philosophical assumptions underlying scientific methods rather than simply covering required topics in biology, chemistry, and physics. Literature and arts could be approached through questions about human nature, moral dilemmas, and the relationship between creativity and understanding. The institutional implications of Socratic education challenge many assumptions about school organization, teacher training, and educational policy. If genuine learning requires extended dialogue and individual attention, then large class sizes and standardized curricula may be counterproductive regardless of their economic efficiency. Teacher preparation programs should focus as much on developing questioning skills and understanding of learning psychology as on mastery of subject matter content. Educational policies should evaluate success by long-term indicators of character development and critical thinking ability rather than short-term measures of information retention or test performance. Modern applications of Socratic educational principles can be found in various pedagogical approaches that emphasize active learning, critical thinking, and student-centered instruction. Problem-based learning in medical and business education reflects Socratic insights about the importance of learning through inquiry rather than passive absorption of information. Seminar-style discussions in liberal arts colleges attempt to create the kind of collaborative dialogue that promotes genuine understanding. Mentoring programs and tutorials provide opportunities for the individualized attention that Socratic education requires. Understanding Socratic educational philosophy also provides resources for addressing contemporary debates about educational reform, standardized testing, and the purposes of schooling in democratic societies. It suggests that education should focus primarily on developing citizens capable of independent thinking and moral judgment rather than merely preparing workers for economic productivity. It emphasizes the importance of character development and ethical reasoning as essential components of complete education rather than optional additions to academic content. It implies that effective education requires substantial investment in teacher development and small-scale learning environments rather than technological solutions or administrative efficiency measures. The ultimate goal of Socratic education is not merely to produce knowledgeable individuals but to promote human flourishing through the development of wisdom and virtue. This requires helping students understand their own potential and purpose while developing the intellectual and moral capacities necessary to fulfill their highest possibilities. Such education serves both individual and social welfare because people who have learned to think clearly and act ethically naturally contribute to the common good while pursuing their own authentic interests. The Socratic vision of education thus represents not just a pedagogical technique, but a comprehensive approach to human development that addresses the deepest questions about what makes life worth living and how societies can promote genuine progress toward justice and wisdom. Part 16. The Trial of Socrates, Philosophy versus Democracy. The trial and execution of Socrates in 399 BC represents one of the most significant confrontations between philosophical inquiry and political authority in human history. The charges against him of corrupting the youth and introducing new gods masked deeper tensions between his commitment to rational examination of all beliefs and Athens' need for social cohesion during a period of political crisis and military defeat. Understanding this conflict reveals fundamental questions about the relationship between individual intellectual freedom and collective democratic decision-making that remain relevant for contemporary societies struggling to balance diverse viewpoints with shared civic commitments. The immediate context of Socrates' trial involved Athens' recovery from devastating military defeat in the Peloponnesian War, and the traumatic experience of rule by the 30 tyrants who had temporarily overthrown democratic government. Many Athenians associated intellectual sophistication and questioning of traditional values with the political and moral corruption that they believed had led to their city's downfall. Socrates' known associations with figures like Alcides and Critias who had betrayed democratic Athens in different ways made him a convenient scapegoat for broader social anxieties about the effects of philosophical education on civic loyalty and moral character. But the specific charges against Socrates were carefully chosen to exploit Athenian religious and social sensitivities while avoiding direct political accusations that might have generated sympathy for him as a victim of persecution. The claim that he corrupted the youth resonated with parents' concerns about their children's apparent disrespect for traditional authorities and values after engaging with sophisticated philosophical questioning. The accusation of introducing new gods played on fears that religious innovation might anger the traditional deities and bring divine punishment on the entire community. These charges allowed prosecutors to present Socrates as a threat to social stability without having to defend specific political positions or policies. Socrates' response to these charges in his trial speech reveals both his philosophical principles and his understanding of the fundamental tensions between his mission and democratic politics. Rather than simply denying the accusations or appealing for mercy, he used the courtroom as an opportunity to explain and defend his entire way of life. He argued that his questioning of conventional beliefs and authorities served Athens by promoting virtue and preventing the kind of moral corruption that leads to political decline. He claimed that his divine mission to examine life and encourage others to do the same benefited the city more than the services of athletes, politicians, or other conventionally honored figures. This defense strategy demonstrated remarkable consistency with Socratic principles, but showed little understanding of political psychology or jury persuasion. His claim to be performing a divine service could easily be interpreted as arrogant presumption rather than humble devotion to truth. His questioning of whether his accusers understood basic concepts like justice and piety probably alienated jurors rather than demonstrating the value of philosophical inquiry. His suggestion that he deserved reward rather than punishment for his philosophical activities seemed to confirm charges of corrupting influence on young people who might adopt similar attitudes of superiority toward conventional authorities. The trial also revealed fundamental tensions between the demands of philosophical inquiry and the requirements of democratic citizenship. Socratic questioning assumes that all beliefs and authorities should be subject to rational examination and that truth matters more than social harmony or political expediency. But democratic governance requires citizens to accept majority decisions even when they disagree with them, and to maintain loyalty to shared institutions even when those institutions are imperfect. Someone committed to following rational argument wherever it leads may find it difficult to participate in political processes that depend on compromise, coalition building, and acceptance of less than ideal solutions. Socrates' refusal to propose exile as an alternative punishment illustrates how his philosophical commitments made political accommodation impossible. From a practical perspective, Accepting exile would have allowed him to continue his philosophical activities elsewhere while avoiding martyrdom that might inspire his followers to adopt similarly uncompromising attitudes. But Socrates argued that abandoning Athens would contradict his divine mission and his obligation to serve the city that had shaped his character and provided opportunities for his intellectual development. His choice to die rather than compromise demonstrated ultimate consistency between his teachings about virtue and his personal actions. The philosophical significance of the trial extends beyond its immediate political context to raise eternal questions about the relationship between individual conscience and collective authority. When philosophical reflection leads to conclusions that conflict with democratic decisions or social consensus, which authority should take precedence? How can societies benefit from the insights that critical thinking provides while maintaining the social cohesion necessary for effective governance? What obligations do philosophers have to present their ideas in ways that serve rather than threaten the communities that support their intellectual activities? Socrates' trial also illuminates the democratic paradox of tolerating ideas and individuals that challenge democratic values or institutions. A truly democratic society should protect intellectual freedom and minority viewpoints even when they criticize majority beliefs or democratic procedures themselves. But unlimited tolerance of anti-democratic ideas might eventually undermine the very democratic institutions that make such tolerance possible. The challenge is distinguishing between legitimate intellectual criticism that strengthens democracy through improved understanding and subversive activities that weaken democratic governance without providing constructive alternatives. The trial's outcome suggests that ancient Athens failed to achieve an adequate balance between these competing values. But it also reveals why such balance is so difficult to maintain in practice. Socrates' commitment to questioning all authorities, including democratic ones, made him appear dangerous during a period when Athens needed unity and confidence to recover from recent defeats. His intellectual approach seemed to undermine the kind of unreflective patriotism and religious devotion that many citizens believed necessary for social solidarity. Yet his execution eliminated exactly the kind of independent critical voice that might have helped Athens avoid future mistakes through better understanding of political and moral principles. Modern democratic societies continue to struggle with similar tensions between intellectual freedom and social cohesion, particularly during periods of crisis when unity seems necessary for survival. Wartime restrictions on speech and assembly often reflect genuine concerns about national security, but may also eliminate valuable criticism of government policies that could prevent costly errors. Educational debates about curriculum content and teaching methods sometimes involve conflicts between promoting critical thinking and maintaining shared cultural values. Academic freedom controversies reveal ongoing disagreement about whether universities should encourage all viewpoints or exclude those that threaten democratic values and social justice. The example of Socrates provides both inspiration and caution for intellectuals and educators who believe their critical activities serve important social purposes. His willingness to die for his principles demonstrates the kind of courage that genuine commitment to truth and virtue may require in extreme circumstances. His consistent devotion to rational inquiry and moral education offers a model for how intellectuals can serve their communities through activities that transcend immediate political concerns. but his apparent inability to communicate effectively with ordinary citizens and his lack of practical political wisdom suggests that philosophical insight alone may be insufficient for successful social reform. Understanding the trial of Socrates thus provides valuable lessons about the conditions necessary for productive dialogue between philosophical inquiry and democratic governance. It suggests that philosophers have obligations to present their ideas in ways that respect the legitimate concerns and values of their fellow citizens rather than simply asserting intellectual superiority. It implies that democratic institutions should protect and encourage critical examination of their own principles and practices rather than viewing such examination as inherently threatening. Most importantly, it demonstrates that the tension between individual conscience and collective decision-making cannot be resolved through simple formulas, but requires ongoing dialogue and mutual accommodation based on shared commitment to both truth and justice. Part 17. Socratic Irony and the Art of Intellectual Humility. Socrates developed a sophisticated rhetorical technique known as irony that allowed him to expose ignorance and promote learning while maintaining respectful relationships with people whose beliefs he challenged. This method of feigning ignorance while guiding others toward recognition of their own limitations demonstrates profound psychological wisdom about how people respond to criticism and how genuine education can occur without causing unnecessary offense or defensive reactions. Understanding Socratic irony reveals important insights about communication, persuasion, and the delicate art of helping others discover difficult truths about themselves and their assumptions. The essence of Socratic irony lies in the contrast between Socrates' genuine wisdom about the extent of human ignorance and his public profession of knowing nothing about important matters. When encountering people who claimed expertise in areas like politics, poetry, or religious knowledge, Socrates would present himself as an eager student seeking to learn from their superior understanding. He would ask apparently innocent questions designed to help him grasp their teachings while actually revealing the contradictions and gaps in their supposed knowledge. This approach allowed him to demonstrate the inadequacy of conventional wisdom without directly attacking or humiliating those who held mistaken beliefs. The psychological effectiveness of this technique stems from its ability to bypass the natural defensive reactions that people experience when their cherished beliefs are challenged directly. Someone who is told that their religious views are superstitious or their political opinions are naive will naturally respond with hostility and rejection rather than careful consideration of the criticism. But someone who is asked to explain their beliefs to an apparently respectful and curious questioner may be willing to examine those beliefs more carefully than they would under direct attack. The ironic approach creates a collaborative atmosphere where both parties appear to be searching for truth together rather than engaging in competitive debate. Socratic irony also serves the important function of maintaining the questioner's credibility and moral authority while exposing error and ignorance. Someone who claims superior knowledge and then demonstrates other people's ignorance may appear arrogant and self-serving rather than genuinely concerned with promoting understanding. But someone who admits their own ignorance while helping others recognize theirs creates an atmosphere of shared humility that makes learning more likely. The ironic stance prevents philosophical inquiry from becoming a power struggle where people defend their positions to maintain self-esteem rather than examining them to discover truth. The technique requires considerable skill and sensitivity because it walks a fine line between genuine intellectual humility and manipulative deception. Socrates' irony was based on authentic recognition of the limits of human knowledge and genuine respect for the people he questioned even when he disagreed with their conclusions. He was not pretending ignorance to trap victims or score intellectual points, but using his superior understanding of ignorance to create conditions where others could achieve similar self-knowledge. The goal was always education rather than embarrassment, insight rather than victory. But the ironic method also reveals sophisticated understanding of the relationship between knowledge and teaching that challenges conventional approaches to education and expertise. Most teachers assume that effective instruction requires demonstrating superior knowledge and providing correct answers to students' questions. Socratic irony suggests that better learning often occurs when teachers help students discover the inadequacy of their current understanding rather than simply replacing it with better information. The most important knowledge may be recognition of ignorance that opens the mind to continued inquiry rather than accumulation of facts that close off further questioning. This approach has profound implications for how experts and authorities should communicate with people who lack their specialized knowledge. The temptation for knowledgeable individuals is often to lecture or correct others based on their superior understanding. But this direct approach frequently produces resistance rather than learning. Socratic irony suggests that experts might be more effective by asking questions that help others discover problems with their current beliefs rather than simply asserting better alternatives. This requires patience and skill because it means allowing people to learn at their own pace through their own discoveries rather than efficiently transferring information. The technique also illuminates important aspects of intellectual virtue and the proper attitude toward one's own knowledge and expertise. Someone who truly understands a complex subject should recognize how much remains unknown and how many questions have not been fully answered. This recognition naturally produces humility about the limits of current knowledge and openness to alternative perspectives that might reveal new insights or correct existing errors. Genuine expertise includes understanding of ignorance rather than simply accumulation of information or technical skill. Modern applications of Socratic irony can be found in various professional contexts where people need to help others examine their assumptions without creating defensiveness or conflict. Therapists often use questioning techniques that help clients discover their own insights rather than providing direct interpretation of their problems. Consultants may be more effective when they guide organizations to recognize their own difficulties rather than imposing external solutions based on superior expertise. Parents and teachers can use ironic questioning to help children think through the consequences of their choices rather than simply commanding obedience or providing moral lectures. The technique is particularly valuable in situations involving ideological disagreement or cultural conflict where direct confrontation is likely to produce polarization rather than understanding. Someone who disagrees with another person's political views might make more progress by asking careful questions about the evidence and reasoning behind those views rather than arguing for alternative positions. This approach shows respect for the other person's intelligence while creating opportunities for them to recognize weaknesses in their own arguments. It transforms potential conflict into collaborative inquiry that might benefit both parties regardless of who changes their mind. But Socratic irony also has potential dangers and limitations that require careful consideration. The technique can easily become manipulative if used primarily to serve the questioner's agenda rather than genuinely promoting mutual understanding and learning. It may appear condescending or dishonest to people who recognize the question as superior knowledge and feel that their ignorance is being exploited for entertainment or educational purposes. Some situations may require direct communication about important facts or urgent moral issues rather than indirect approaches that allow for gradual discovery. The effectiveness of ironic questioning also depends heavily on the relationship between the people involved and the context in which it occurs. Socrates could employ irony successfully because his genuine care for others' well-being was evident, and because his conversations took place in informal settings where people had volunteered to participate. The same techniques might be less effective in hierarchical relationships or formal contexts where power dynamics interfere with the collaborative atmosphere that irony requires. Cultural differences in communication styles and attitudes toward authority may also affect how ironic approaches are received and interpreted. Understanding Socratic irony ultimately reveals the profound connection between intellectual humility and effective teaching or communication. Someone who recognizes the limits of their own knowledge and genuinely respects others' capacity for learning naturally adopts approaches that promote mutual discovery rather than one-sided instruction. They understand that lasting change in beliefs and attitudes must come from within rather than being imposed from outside, however superior the external perspective might be. The ironic stance embodies this understanding by creating conditions where others can experience their own need for better knowledge rather than being told about their ignorance by someone who claims to know better. Part 18. Legacy in Ancient Philosophy from Plato to the Stoics. The intellectual influence of Socrates on subsequent philosophical development cannot be overstated, as virtually every major school of ancient philosophy defined itself in relationship to his methods, insights, and example. His students and followers developed his ideas in different directions, while his opponents and critics formulated alternative approaches that nevertheless addressed problems he had identified as central to philosophical inquiry. Understanding how later thinkers interpreted and extended Socratic philosophy reveals both the enduring power of his insights and the creative diversity that emerged from engagement with his revolutionary approach to wisdom and virtue. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, devoted his entire philosophical career to developing and systematizing the insights he had gained through participation in Socratic conversations. His early dialogues present Socrates as a questioner who exposes ignorance without providing positive doctrine, faithfully representing the historical figure's approach to philosophical inquiry. But Plato's later works attribute to Socrates elaborate metaphysical theories about the nature of reality, knowledge, and the good that go far beyond anything the historical Socrates explicitly taught. This development illustrates how creative disciples can honor their teachers by extending their insights in new directions while remaining faithful to underlying principles and methods. The academy that Plato founded to continue Socratic education became the model for institutional philosophical education throughout the ancient world. Its emphasis on dialogue, mathematical reasoning, and moral development reflected Socratic insights about learning as collaborative inquiry rather than passive reception of information. The inscription over its entrance declaring that no one ignorant of geometry should enter demonstrated commitment to rigorous intellectual standards while maintaining the Socratic connection between mathematical and moral knowledge. Students at the academy learned to practice philosophical questioning as a way of life rather than merely an academic exercise. Aristotle, though critical of many Platonic doctrines, acknowledged his fundamental debt to the Socratic tradition while developing systematic approaches to logic, ethics, and political theory that built on Socratic foundations. His emphasis on practical wisdom and character development reflected Socratic insights about the connection between knowledge and virtue. Though he rejected the claim that virtue consists entirely in knowledge, his systematic approach to ethical reasoning and his analysis of different types of friendship showed how Socratic insights could be developed through careful observation and logical analysis rather than only through dialectical questioning. The educational curriculum he developed combined theoretical study with practical training in ways that honored both intellectual excellence and moral character. The Stoic philosophers, beginning with Zeno of Citium, drew heavily on Socratic teachings about virtue, the care of the soul, and the proper attitude towards external goods. Their central doctrine that virtue is the only true good and that external circumstances cannot affect the happiness of the wise person represents a radical development of Socratic insights about the primacy of character over fortune. Their practices of self-examination, rational reflection, and acceptance of what cannot be changed directly reflect Socratic approaches to moral development and the philosophical life. The Stoic emphasis on living according to nature can be understood as an attempt to systematize Socratic insights about virtue and human flourishing within a comprehensive cosmological framework. But the Stoics also transformed Socratic teachings in significant ways that reflected their own historical circumstances and philosophical priorities. Where Socrates emphasized questioning and dialogue as essential to philosophical inquiry, many Stoics developed systematic doctrines that could be learned and applied without extensive questioning or discussion. Their focus on individual self-sufficiency and emotional control sometimes lacked the social dimension of Socratic ethics that emphasized friendship and community involvement. Their confidence in rational principles and natural law contrasted with Socratic intellectual humility about the limits of human knowledge. The Cynics, represented by figures like Antisthenes and Douins, claimed to follow Socratic teachings about the unimportance of external goods and the primacy of virtue over conventional social values. Their radical rejection of material possessions, social status, and cultural refinement reflected an extreme interpretation of Socratic insights about what is truly valuable in human life. Their practice of challenging social conventions through provocative behavior and speech echoed Socratic criticism of unreflective traditional beliefs, though often without his subtle irony and respect for persons. The Cynic emphasis on living according to nature rather than social convention represented one possible development of Socratic teachings about following reason rather than popular opinion. The skeptical tradition, particularly as developed by Pyrrho and later by Sextus Empiricus, drew on Socratic declarations of ignorance to argue that suspension of judgment about all disputed questions represents the wisest response to human cognitive limitations. They interpreted Socratic wisdom as recognition that we cannot achieve genuine knowledge about fundamental questions and should therefore avoid the anxiety and conflict that result from holding strong opinions about uncertain matters. Their systematic criticism of dogmatic philosophical systems reflected Socratic insights about the tendency of supposed experts to claim knowledge they do not actually possess. But their conclusion that we should avoid all theoretical commitments went beyond Socratic practice, which maintained strong commitments to moral principles despite acknowledging ignorance about many metaphysical questions. Even philosophers who disagreed with Socratic teachings often defined their positions in relationship to his ideas and methods. Epicurus criticized Socratic intellectualism and developed a philosophy focused on pleasure and friendship that nevertheless addressed many of the same questions about how to live well that Socrates had identified as central to philosophical inquiry. The Epicurean emphasis on careful reasoning about what contributes to genuine happiness reflected Socratic insights about the importance of examining one's assumptions about the good life. Their communities of philosophical friendship created social environments for moral development that paralleled Socratic approaches to education through dialogue and mutual support. The influence of Socratic methods on ancient philosophical education extended far beyond any single school or doctrine. Philosophers of different traditions adopted questioning techniques, emphasized the importance of self-knowledge, and treated philosophy as a way of life rather than merely an intellectual exercise. The practice of philosophical dialogue became a standard method for exploring difficult questions and testing different positions against reasoned criticism. The Socratic example of choosing death rather than abandoning philosophical principles provided a model of intellectual integrity that influenced how philosophers understood their responsibilities and commitments. The transmission of Socratic ideas through different philosophical schools also illustrates how fundamental insights can remain vital while being interpreted and developed in diverse ways. Each tradition emphasized different aspects of Socratic teaching while adding elements that reflected their own theoretical interests and practical concerns. This diversity suggests that Socratic philosophy contains resources for addressing a wide range of human needs and circumstances rather than providing a single orthodox approach to wisdom and virtue. The continuing vitality of different interpretations demonstrates the depth and complexity of Socratic insights that continue to generate new understanding through creative engagement. Understanding how ancient philosophers developed Socratic ideas also reveals the ongoing relevance of his central insights for contemporary philosophical work. The questions he identified about the relationship between knowledge and virtue, the nature of justice and the good life, and the proper methods for philosophical inquiry remain central to current debates in ethics, political philosophy, and epistemology. His approaches to education through questioning and dialogue continue to influence pedagogical theory and practice across many disciplines. His example of philosophical courage and integrity provides inspiration for intellectuals who face pressure to compromise their principles for social acceptance or professional advancement. The diversity of ancient interpretations of Socratic philosophy also cautions against assuming that any single contemporary approach captures the full meaning or significance of his contribution. Just as ancient philosophers found different valuable insights in his teachings, modern thinkers may discover new applications and interpretations that address current needs and concerns while remaining faithful to fundamental Socratic principles. The continuing dialogue between different philosophical traditions about Socratic inheritance suggests that his legacy remains alive and productive rather than simply historical. Each generation must discover for itself what aspects of Socratic wisdom are most relevant for their circumstances while contributing to the ongoing development of insights that he initiated but could not fully explore within the limitations of any single lifetime. Part 19. Modern Resurrections. Socrates in Contemporary Thought. The influence of Socratic philosophy extends far beyond ancient Greek thought into virtually every aspect of modern intellectual, educational, and therapeutic practice. demonstrating the enduring relevance of his insights about human nature, learning, and moral development. Contemporary applications of Socratic methods can be found in psychotherapy, education, business consulting, legal reasoning, and scientific inquiry. While his fundamental questions about the examined life continue to challenge individuals and societies seeking authentic values and meaningful purposes. Understanding these modern applications reveals both the timeless wisdom of Socratic approaches and their adaptability to new contexts and challenges that Socrates himself could never have anticipated. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most widely used and empirically supported approaches to mental health treatment, directly employs Socratic questioning techniques to help clients examine their thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions that contribute to emotional distress and behavioral problems. Therapists trained in this approach guide clients through careful questioning that reveals the connections between thoughts, feelings, and actions while helping them discover more realistic and helpful ways of interpreting their experiences. The method assumes that many psychological problems result from distorted thinking patterns that can be corrected through patient inquiry and rational examination rather than through direct advice or interpretation. This therapeutic application demonstrates how Socratic insights about the relationship between knowledge and well-being can be systematically applied to promote mental health and personal growth. Educational reform movements throughout the modern period have repeatedly rediscovered Socratic principles as alternatives to traditional approaches that emphasize memorization, passive learning, and authoritarian teaching methods. Progressive educators from John Dewey to contemporary advocates of critical thinking have argued that genuine learning requires active student participation in questioning and discovery rather than simple reception of predetermined content. The Socratic emphasis on developing students' capacity for independent reasoning rather than their ability to reproduce correct answers has influenced curriculum design, assessment methods, and teacher training programs across many disciplines and educational levels. Problem-based learning, seminar-style discussions, and collaborative inquiry projects all reflect Socratic insights about how people actually learn and what kinds of education promote authentic understanding. Scientific methodology itself embodies Socratic principles through its emphasis on systematic questioning of hypotheses, openness to evidence that contradicts existing theories, and recognition that current knowledge is provisional and subject to revision. The scientific commitment to following evidence wherever it leads rather than defending predetermined conclusions reflects Socratic insights about intellectual honesty and the pursuit of truth over personal preference or authority. The practice of peer review and public debate about research findings creates the kind of collaborative inquiry that Socrates demonstrated through philosophical dialogue. Even the scientific acknowledgement of ignorance about many fundamental questions echoes Socratic wisdom about the limits of human knowledge and the importance of remaining open to new discoveries. Legal reasoning and judicial decision-making employ methods through careful examination of evidence, systematic questioning of witnesses and arguments, and the attempt to distinguish between reliable knowledge and mere opinion or prejudice. Law schools have traditionally used Socratic questioning as a primary teaching method, forcing students to defend their interpretations of legal principles and case law through rigorous dialogue with professors and peers. The adversarial system of justice assumes that truth is most likely to emerge through careful questioning and debate between opposing viewpoints rather than through acceptance of any single authority's opinion. Constitutional interpretation and judicial review reflect Socratic insights about the need to examine fundamental assumptions about justice, rights, and governmental authority rather than simply accepting traditional practices or popular preferences. Business and organizational consulting increasingly employ Socratic approaches to help leaders and teams examine their assumptions about strategy, culture, and effectiveness while developing better approaches to complex challenges. Management consultants often find that their most valuable contribution comes not from providing expert solutions, but from asking questions that help organizations recognize problems they had not previously identified or considered. Leadership development programs emphasize skills in questioning and listening that enable managers to help their subordinates discover better approaches to their work rather than simply directing them to follow predetermined procedures. Organizational learning initiatives reflect Socratic insights about the importance of creating environments where people feel safe to question existing practices and experiment with new approaches. Contemporary philosophy continues to grapple with fundamental Socratic questions about the nature of knowledge, virtue, justice, and the good life while developing new methods and approaches that build on his foundational insights. Feminist philosophers have adopted Socratic questioning to examine assumptions about gender, power, and rationality that have been taken for granted in traditional philosophical systems. Environmental ethicists use Socratic methods to challenge anthropocentric assumptions about the relationship between humans and nature. Philosophers of science employ Socratic insights about the provisional nature of knowledge to understand how scientific theories develop and change over time. The digital age has created new opportunities and challenges for applying Socratic methods to contemporary learning and communication. Online discussion forums and digital platforms can facilitate the kind of collaborative inquiry that Socrates promoted, allowing people from diverse backgrounds to engage in philosophical dialogue about important questions. But the speed and anonymity of digital communication can also undermine the patience and respect that Socratic questioning requires for effectiveness. The vast amount of information available online makes Socratic wisdom about distinguishing between knowledge and mere opinion more relevant than ever, while also creating new forms of confusion and misinformation that require sophisticated critical thinking skills to navigate. Modern research in psychology and neuroscience has provided empirical support for many Socratic insights about learning, memory, and behavior change. Studies of metacognition demonstrate the importance of thinking about thinking and examining one's own mental processes for effective learning and problem solving. Research on habit formation and behavior change shows that lasting transformation requires understanding the beliefs and assumptions that support current patterns rather than simply trying to impose new behaviors through willpower. Investigation of social influence and group dynamics reveals how questioning and dialogue can promote better decision-making compared to individual reflection or authority-based directives. Contemporary applications of Socratic philosophy also face significant challenges and limitations that require careful consideration. The time and patience required for genuine Socratic questioning may be incompatible with the efficiency demands of modern institutions and the shortened attention spans that characterize digital culture. The individualistic focus of much Socratic inquiry may need to be balanced with greater attention to social and cultural factors that shape beliefs and behavior. The intellectual approach that Socrates emphasized may be insufficient for addressing problems that require emotional healing, cultural change, or structural reform rather than simply better understanding. Understanding modern applications of Socratic philosophy reveals both the timeless relevance of his insights and the ongoing need for creative adaptation to new contexts and challenges. Each generation must discover how Socratic principles can address their particular circumstances and concerns while remaining faithful to his fundamental commitment to truth, virtue, and human flourishing. The diversity of contemporary applications suggests that Socratic philosophy contains resources for addressing a wide range of human needs and problems rather than providing a single orthodox approach to wisdom and virtue. The continuing vitality of Socratic influence demonstrates that his legacy remains alive and productive rather than simply historical, offering hope that his insights will continue to inspire and guide human development in whatever new forms civilization may take. Part 20. The Eternal Questions. Why Socrates matters today. In our age of rapid technological change, information overload, and social fragmentation, the fundamental questions that Socrates posed about human existence remain not only relevant but urgently necessary for navigating contemporary challenges and discovering authentic meaning in modern life. His insights about the examined life, the pursuit of virtue, and the limits of human knowledge provide essential resources for individuals and societies seeking wisdom in an era when traditional authorities have lost credibility and new forms of confusion and uncertainty have emerged. Understanding why Socratic philosophy matters today requires recognizing how his eternal questions address perennial human needs while offering practical guidance for the specific challenges that characterize our historical moment. The Socratic commitment to examining one's life has never been more important than in our current context where external pressures and distractions constantly pull attention away from the fundamental questions about what makes existence meaningful and worthwhile. Social media, consumer culture, and the demands of economic productivity create environments that discourage reflection and encourage reactive responses to immediate stimuli rather than thoughtful consideration of long-term goals and values. The pace of contemporary life often prevents people from developing the kind of self-knowledge that enables authentic choices about career, relationships, and lifestyle based on genuine understanding of their deepest commitments rather than social expectations or unconscious habits. Socratic questioning provides tools for cutting through the noise and confusion to focus on what truly matters for human flourishing. The explosion of available information through digital technology makes Socratic wisdom about distinguishing between knowledge and opinion more crucial than ever for responsible citizenship. Citizenship and personal decision-making. Anyone with internet access can find arguments and evidence for virtually any position on complex issues. But most people lack the critical thinking skills necessary to evaluate competing claims or recognize their own biases and limitations. The democratic process depends on citizens who can examine their beliefs rationally rather than simply defending whatever positions they already hold or accepting whatever information confirms their existing prejudices. Socratic methods of questioning assumptions, examining evidence, and acknowledging uncertainty provide essential skills for navigating information-rich environments responsibly. Contemporary debates about artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, climate change, and other technological developments raise fundamental questions about human nature, moral responsibility, and the good life that Socrates identified as central to philosophical inquiry. These issues cannot be resolved through technical expertise alone, but require wisdom about what kinds of changes actually serve human flourishing and what values should guide decisions about how new capabilities are developed and used. The Socratic emphasis on moral knowledge and the primacy of virtue over technical skill provides crucial perspectives for ensuring that technological progress serves human excellence rather than merely efficiency or power. His insights about the unity of knowledge and virtue suggest that technical experts need philosophical wisdom to guide their work responsibly. The contemporary crisis of meaning and purpose that affects many individuals in developed societies reflects exactly the kind of spiritual emptiness that Socrates warned against when he argued that caring for the soul matters more than accumulating external goods. Despite unprecedented material prosperity and technological capabilities, many people report feelings of depression, anxiety, and existential confusion that suggest their deepest human needs are not being met by consumer culture and career success. Socratic insights about the relationship between virtue and happiness provide alternatives to materialistic definitions of success while offering practical approaches to developing character and finding meaning through moral and intellectual excellence. His example demonstrates that a life devoted to questioning, learning, and service can provide profound satisfaction regardless of external circumstances or social recognition. The political polarization and social fragmentation that characterize many contemporary societies reflect the kind of unreflective partisan loyalty that Socrates criticized through his commitment to following rational argument wherever it might lead rather than defending predetermined positions. Much political discourse involves people talking past each other rather than genuinely engaging with alternative viewpoints or examining the evidence and reasoning that support different policy proposals. Socratic dialogue methods could help bridge ideological divides by creating opportunities for collaborative inquiry into shared problems rather than competitive debate between opposing camps. His emphasis on intellectual humility and acknowledgement of ignorance provides models for how people with different perspectives can work together productively despite their disagreements. Educational challenges in the digital age require exactly the kind of pedagogical innovation that Socrates pioneered through his emphasis on active learning, critical thinking, and character development rather than passive absorption of information. Traditional educational approaches that focus on memorizing content and following procedures are becoming obsolete as information becomes instantly accessible and artificial intelligence capabilities expand rapidly. The most valuable educational goals now involve developing students' capacity for reasoning, questioning, and moral judgment that cannot be easily automated or replaced by technological tools. Socratic methods of teaching through questioning and dialogue provide proven approaches for promoting these essential human capabilities while maintaining the personal relationships that make education meaningful and transformative. The global challenges of environmental destruction, economic inequality, and cultural conflict require the kind of collaborative wisdom and moral courage that Socratic philosophy promotes through its emphasis on seeking truth through dialogue and choosing virtue despite personal cost. These problems cannot be solved through individual action or technical fixes alone, but demand coordinated efforts by people who share commitment to justice and human flourishing across cultural and national boundaries. Socratic insights about the unity of virtue and the importance of moral education provide resources for building the kind of character and wisdom necessary for addressing challenges that transcend immediate self-interest. His example of choosing death rather than compromising his principles demonstrates the level of commitment, that may be required for creating meaningful social change. The therapeutic and healing dimensions of Socratic inquiry remain vitally relevant for individuals and communities struggling with trauma, addiction, mental health challenges, and relationship problems that reflect deeper issues about meaning, purpose, and authentic living. Many contemporary problems stem from disconnection from authentic values and purposes rather than simply biochemical imbalances or external circumstances that can be fixed through medication or environmental changes. Socratic approaches to examining beliefs, clarifying values, and developing character provide complementary resources to medical and social interventions by addressing the spiritual and moral dimensions of human suffering. His insights about the care of the soul suggest that lasting healing often requires fundamental changes in how people understand themselves and their relationships rather than simply symptom management. The continuing relevance of Socratic philosophy also lies in its capacity to inspire hope and purpose during periods of uncertainty and change by demonstrating that individual commitment to wisdom and virtue can make meaningful differences regardless of external circumstances. His life proves that philosophical inquiry and moral excellence are accessible to anyone willing to examine their beliefs and commit themselves to truth and justice rather than being reserved for academic specialists or religious authorities. The transformative power of questioning and dialogue creates possibilities for personal growth and social improvement that do not depend on political power, economic resources, or technological solutions. Every conversation becomes an opportunity for promoting understanding and virtue, making philosophical practice a form of social action available to everyone. Perhaps most importantly, Socrates matters today because he demonstrates that the fundamental human questions about how to live well, what knowledge is worth pursuing, and what values deserve commitment cannot be answered definitively, but must be explored continuously through ongoing inquiry and dialogue. Each generation faces these eternal questions in new contexts with new challenges and opportunities that require fresh thinking while building on the wisdom accumulated through centuries of human reflection and experience. Socratic philosophy provides not final answers but reliable methods for engaging with ultimate questions in ways that promote both individual flourishing and collective wisdom. The legacy of Socrates ultimately lies not in any particular doctrine or technique, but in his demonstration that human life achieves its highest potential through the committed pursuit of wisdom, virtue, and truth in community with others who share similar aspirations. His questions remain our questions. His challenges remain our challenges. And his hope for human excellence remains our inheritance and responsibility. In every age, including our own, there are individuals who hear the call to examine life, question assumptions, seek truth through dialogue, and choose virtue despite personal cost. They carry forward the Socratic mission not as historical reenactment, but as living commitment to the highest possibilities of human existence. In this sense, Socrates never died, but continues to live wherever people gather to ask fundamental questions about how we should live and what kinds of persons we should strive to become. The examined life that Socrates declared worth living remains the essential task of every human being who seeks authentic existence and meaningful contribution to the ongoing human conversation about wisdom, justice, and the good. His questions are eternal because they address the permanent features of human existence that persist beneath changing historical circumstances and technological developments. His methods remain relevant because they reflect deep insights about human psychology and learning that transcend cultural differences and temporal limitations. Most importantly, his example continues to inspire because it demonstrates the extraordinary possibilities that emerge when ordinary individuals commit themselves wholeheartedly to the pursuit of truth and virtue. In this commitment, every person can participate in the philosophical life that Socrates pioneered and find their own authentic responses to the eternal questions that define human existence at its most profound and meaningful level. In our era, where technological change unfolds rapidly, information overload drowns out every sense, and society faces profound fragmentation, the fundamental questions Socrates posed about human existence not only retain their value but also become an urgent guiding compass. The philosophies of the examined life, the pursuit of virtue, and the awareness of the limits of knowledge are essential resources for souls seeking authentic wisdom. Modern society is witnessing a paradox. Unprecedented material prosperity is accompanied by a widespread spiritual emptiness. It is in this context that Socrates' commitment to examining one's life becomes paramount. Combating distraction, social media, consumer culture, and the economic productivity treadmill constantly create an environment that erodes reflection. People are pulled into immediate reactions instead of thoughtful consideration of core goals and values. This frantic pace of life prevents us from developing self-knowledge, the foundation for making authentic choices about career, relationships, and lifestyle, rather than merely conforming to social expectations or unconscious habits. Caring for the soul, crises of depression, anxiety, and existential confusion are testament to the kind of spiritual emptiness Socrates warned against. He argued that caring for the soul is more important than accumulating external goods. His philosophy offers an alternative to the material definition of success, guiding us to develop character and find meaning through moral and intellectual excellence. The explosion of digital technology has turned knowledge into a boundless ocean, making Socrates' wisdom about distinguishing between knowledge and opinion more essential than ever for a responsible citizen. Overcoming bias. Although information is available to everyone, most of us lack the critical thinking skills to evaluate conflicting arguments and recognize our own inherent biases. The survival of democracy requires citizens who can examine their beliefs rationally, rather than merely defending pre-existing stances. Healing divides. Political polarization and social fragmentation are a mirror image of the unreflective partisan loyalty that Socrates criticized. The Socratic dialogue methods have the capacity to bridge ideological divides by creating opportunities for collaborative inquiry into shared problems. The emphasis on intellectual humility and the acknowledgement of ignorance is a model for how people can work together effectively despite their disagreements. Socrates' eternal value lies in his demonstration that philosophical inquiry and moral excellence are not the exclusive privilege of academic specialists or clergy, but are accessible to anyone willing to examine their beliefs and commit to truth. The transformative power of dialogue. The transformative power of questioning and dialogue creates possibilities for personal growth and social improvement, independent of political power or technological solutions. Every conversation, according to this philosophy, is an opportunity to promote understanding and virtue, turning philosophical practice into a universal form of social action. The immortal master. In a profound sense, Socrates never died. He continues to live wherever people gather to ask fundamental questions about how we should live and what kinds of persons we should strive to become. The examined life that he declared worth living remains the essential task of every individual seeking authentic existence. Personal commitment and extraordinary potential. Socrates' example demonstrates the extraordinary possibilities that arise when ordinary individuals wholeheartedly commit to the pursuit of truth and virtue. In this commitment, everyone can participate in the philosophical life he pioneered, and find their own authentic responses to the eternal questions that define human existence at its most profound and meaningful level. In summary, Socrates' legacy does not lie in any specific doctrine, but in his demonstration that human life achieves its highest potential through the committed pursuit of wisdom, virtue, and truth in community. His questions remain our questions, and his hope for human excellence remains the inheritance and responsibility of every generation.